Okay, this is our last lecture on California politics. This is the California court system. This is what I know and breathe. So, an introduction to the court system. So, from the start, we want to talk about a 2019 California court case that decided it's unconstitutional to use the criminal process to force people to pay fines that they cannot pay. So, in a criminal case, near the end of a criminal case, when somebody is sentenced, typically there are court costs, there are custody costs. If the person is a public defender, there's costs related to that. Lots of different costs. But the California court case did say it is excessive and it fuels, the racial and ethnic economic gaps because persons of color are more likely to be searched and cited for offenses and also jailed for not paying fees. The legislators in California acknowledged the systemic disparities when they abolished 23 different court fees from state law. Most local governments still rely on types of late fees and other surcharges. So late fees, if you have a fee, that is still good to go. So the role of the state's courts are to provide a fair and equal access to justice. Judges must defend the Constitution against unconstitutional laws, bias, oppression of people, discrimination, or the elimination of people's rights. Judges also verify that the rules, laws, and policies that the executive and legislative branch produce are constitutional and lawful. So we have a three-tiered court system. The lowest level, is the Superior Court. So this is, where you go if you have jury duty or a speeding ticket, things like that. There's a Superior Court in each of the 58 counties. It's kind of interesting. I had to do a project once, and there's everything from massive courthouses like we have in Riverside County to one-room courthouses where all the staff is in, they do hear all types of cases all in the same because it's such a small county. So there are 58 counties, so there's 58 different Superior Courts, and there's about 2,000 judges that deal with virtually all of these cases. So as of now, we do have about 4.4 million cases that are being dealt with on a yearly basis. This is down from 10 years ago when they had over 8.5 million cases. Riverside County was kind of at the head of that when we had really harsh prosecutorial policies. And even now in Riverside County, we are a hardcore county and we don't put up with crime. So that leads to more cases needing to be tried. So there's three different categories of crime. That is infractions. So an infraction is something like you get a speeding ticket, any kind of ticket like that. You don't get a jury trial for a speeding ticket. It's heard by a judge. And this is about 80% of the Supreme Court docket. Then you have misdemeanors. So misdemeanors, they are a crime that's punishable by up to 1 year in jail or $1,000 fine. You can get a jury trial for that. Example of misdemeanors are drunk driving, vandalism, and petty theft. Then we have felonies. These are serious and violent criminal acts that can range from over 1 year in state prison to the death penalty. Murder, robbery, rape, burglary. All of those are felonies. You definitely get a jury trial then. So the people who bring the cases are the county district attorney brings criminal cases against the accused. So in criminal law, it is always the people of the state of California or whatever government agency is whatever jurisdiction. It could be the United States of America. It could be the people of the state of Nevada, wherever you're at, because crime is viewed as a wrong against society, and the district attorney is helping with that. Then we have civil suits. So civil suits, those are money damages, and they're suits between individuals and organizations. There are three types of civil suits in California. There are small claims cases. These are people seeking $10,000 or less. There are no attorneys allowed at the small claims hearing. You have the forms, and you go to the judge and just tell them what your case is. Then we have limited civil cases, and these are suits that they're seeking less than $25,000 worth of damages. And then we have unlimited civil cases, and those are $25,000 and above. So these unlimited cases, think about things like sexual harassment, um, wrongful death, etc. Limited civil cases are going to be things like, your fender bender, or maybe your car got totaled. So the state attorney general can bring civil cases, even though he is our chief law enforcement officer. So these are going to be larger scale civil cases, such as companies that are breaking environmental laws. The attorney general's office comes in the event that somebody from the district attorney's office is either victimized or prosecuted. So in the event, like, for example, a victim advocate was being threatened by Mexican mafia, so she carried a gun to work. It's illegal to have a gun in a county building unless you're a police officer. So the attorney general's office prosecuted her. So again, in civil, it's money damages. Civil suits do not, get jail. You don't get jail time for that, and you have to pay for civil representation or go to pro bono courts, organizations, because there is no constitutional right to assistance in a civil case. Other types of courts that we have are juvenile courts. So juvenile courts are kind of weird. They have adjudication in matters, which is when a juvenile commits a crime, and they also have delinquency and dependency. So dependency is where you're going to see like parental neglect. We have family law courts. We keep family law courts separate, so that is the laws of divorce, legal separation, and child custody. And then probate cases. So probate cases are going to be anything dealing with the estate of someone who's deceased, or conservatorships, where the state or an individual takes action for somebody mentally disabled. Okay, so then there are changes. COVID really screwed up the courts, guys. There was a time where a lot of hearings were held remotely. There was even a time where our courts were closed from March till about June, July of 2020, and that really screwed up a lot. So we did have the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, issue rulings on that. But now we are starting to get back to status quo. So we also have this thing called alternative dispute resolution. So the idea is that going to trial is expensive. So sometimes it's a lot easier to hire a mediator or an arbitrator and plead your case to them. So the difference between the two, the arbitrator is like you get a retired judge or a trained arbitrator, and you present your case as if you're presenting a trial. It's just a lot cheaper. A mediator is where they work together. The mediator works with the two parties to try and come to a conclusion. Then we're seeing this pattern now in California with collaborative courts, and these are called problem-solving courts. So we have this mental health court, homeless court, drug court, domestic violence court, veterans court. All these ones, they look at the special needs of the individual defendant and try to come up with a more holistic solution. For example, domestic violence court, they have a lot of access to anger management and different types of programs. Drug court has rehabilitative programs. Veterans court, at least in Riverside County, is staffed by a judge who is a military veteran, and they get veterans from both the TA's office and the public defender's office, because they want to create that environment that respects what the veteran did for our country and help get that person back on the right path. And those veterans courts also really do respect the fact that many of our soldiers, suffer from, things like PTSD that may have led to something like a DUI, and how we need to get that person help rather than just penalize them. So we also have this idea of the care court. So these are when an individual is severely impaired, for those suffering from severe mental illness or substance abuse issues. They give what's called a wraparound service. They have medication stabilization, behavioral health care, and housing to help these people live a more productive life. And then the appellate courts review contested cases. So the appellate courts are, we have one in Riverside that is called the District Court of Appeals. There has to be an issue of law, and they affirm rather than reverse judgments in about 80% of the cases, meaning they say the lower court was right. Then we have the California Supreme Court, and that is a 7-member Supreme Court that is the highest judicial authority in the state. They're in San Francisco and periodically hear cases on assignment in Los Angeles and Sacramento. So, yeah, they do that because they recognize that California is a large state, and there might be a case with litigants and parties that are down here in Los Angeles. It's hard for them to get up to Sacramento or San Francisco. They have a wide discretion, similar to the U.S. Supreme Court, over what cases that they hear. There is a death penalty case in the state of California is a mandatory review by the California State Supreme Court. This is one of the reasons why the death penalty, it takes so long to execute an inmate in California, because they all must go through the state Supreme Court for a final review, and there's a lack of qualified attorneys to handle those cases. So the justices have a lot of responsibility. They have to get the right staff to assist them. Their interpretations of the law define the boundaries of acceptable behavior in California. We've had a lot of investment in our courts because we're trying to change some of our courts to have those collaborative courts instead of just being old-fashioned punitive type courts. So how does somebody become a judge? So they have to be an attorney who is practicing law in California for at least 10 years. Typically, it is done through governor appointment rather than by running for office. Although there's been a lot in our ballots recently of people who have done it by running for office. It is interesting to note that undocumented immigrants are allowed to be admitted to the state bar and practice law in California. So, eventually that person can become a judge. The governor can shape the ideological bent of our judiciary simply because he gets to pick who to appoint. Your book does make some comments about the demographic composition of the bench in contrast to our prison population, arguing that the bench remains middle-class white men, and we have a heavily multiracial ethnic prison population, but does note that Governor Newsom has over half of his appointees are women, 8% are LGBTQ, 4% are veterans, and 58% of persons are persons of color. These vacancies in the courts are unpredictable, so this is more of a standard retirement that they go to, unlike the U.S. Supreme Court, where they stay on it till they die. Okay, then our Supreme Court composition has changed from conservative to Democrat. Most justices remain for decades, and they're subject to election every 12 years. So those are those people on our ballots. They just did do it. Where you're like, who is that person? I don't know, but they're the only person running for the seat, so I guess I vote for them, right? So we do have some diversity in the state Supreme Court. Patricia Guerrero is the first Latina and first-generation citizen of Mexican parentage to be the Chief Justice. Then we had Goodwin Liu, who was born to Taiwanese immigrant parents, Leandra Kruger, a black woman in her 40s, Martin Jenkins, a black first openly gay justice, and Kelly Evans, the first black openly lesbian justice. So we do have diversity. These justices do serve 6-year terms. If they were appointed to the office and not elected, they must become nonpartisan candidates for their office when the term expires. They can run for as many 6-year terms as they want. So what about the confirmation of appointees to the appellate courts? So they have to require the governor's nomination. They have to be screened by the State Bar's Commission on Judicial Nominees, and then be confirmed by the Commission on Judicial Appointments. Confirmation allows them to fulfill the remainder of their term. Then a retention election is a nonpartisan election where the judge must face the voters, and they get a yes or no of whether or not they get to keep their job. It's really rare for these guys to be defeated. Typically, unless they've done something atrocious and there's a candidate and a campaign against them, you're not going to hear about them. Judges are not immune to campaign or interest group pressures. So in Riverside County back in 2007, there was a couple judges that the DA's office was trying to get off the bench because they just weren't really good judges. They made a lot of really weird rulings. And one of them, I remember being in his courtroom, it was just uncomfortable for everybody. He was a jerk. Trying to stay professional, but the guy was a jerk. Um, so that can happen. So a judge can be dismissed, though, um, for improper conduct or incompetence arising from activities involving bias, substance abuse, or sexual harassment. We have this Commission on Judicial Performance that investigates allegations of judicial misconduct and focuses on personal behavior that may warrant a warning letter, formal censure, or forced retirement or removal. We had a judge in Riverside County, Paul Zellerbach, who um, he wanted to go to the Angels game, but he had a jury that was deliberating on a murder case. So that's kind of more important. Murder case, sending someone to prison for the rest of their life, or the Angels. And he decided to go to the Angels game and left the jury. The State Commission on Judicial Performance issued a censure for that because that is not what a judicial officer should be doing. So, what's the court's administration? It's headed by the Chief Justice, and then we have the Judicial Council of California. They set our policies of the court system. There's 21 voting members who establish the rules and procedures. They even provide us court forms. So if you're ever involved in like a family law case, or a lot of cases, we have Judicial Council forms. We have the Administrative Office of the Courts, that is a sub-agency, and staff members who implement the Judicial Council's policy. Then each court will have administrators, like typically the court clerk, that's overall of the county, who supervise and keep official records, make sure there's interpreters, schedule trials, and develop programs to address caseloads. So it's a really administrative heavy and regulation heavy business to be a court clerk. Juries, I'm interested to see who's ever been on a jury. That's typically your only encounter with the courts. So, your jurors are randomly selected from lists of registered voters and from the DMV. So just don't give me that excuse that you don't want to vote because you don't want to get jury duty. Because if you have a driver's license, you're still on the list. We have this idea of one day, one trial, meaning that jurors are excused from service at the end of a single day if they have not been assigned a trial, and they only need to come once a year. So then if assigned to a trial, you do have to sit there for the trial and you decide the guilt or the verdict. We have a hard time, convincing people to sit out in juries. Juries tend to mostly have people who have time on their hands, either the elderly, unemployed, or the wealthy. About 9 million people are summoned for jury duty each year. Only half are eligible and able to sit on a trial. Jury trial is a mess. Jury selection is a mess. Totally lots of fun. Compensation for jurors is below the national average. In California, you get a whopping $15 a day, starting with the second day, and 34 cents for mileage one way. You can totally make a living on that, right? Then we have this idea of grand jurors. So grand jurors, they investigate the conduct of official government. This is not something you get subpoenaed to or summoned to. You have to volunteer to be on the grand jury. So they're kind of like a watchdog group, and they also, kind of deal with corruption. They want to look at what's going on in these government agencies to see if there's a problem and, move on from there. So 90% of our cases never make it to trial because we don't have enough courtrooms, first off, and we try and push plea bargaining. So it's expensive for discovery, investigation. We have to maintain filings, and there's police officers make mistakes. That's why cases aren't slam dunks. So you can plead to a lesser offense or just plead to a lesser sentence. But we do have a growing prison population that your book says the trend is being reversed because of modifications to 3 strikes. And that's also due to a increase in soft on crime, pro-criminal, laws in California. So 3 strikes has been kind of modified to make sure that 3rd strike is something that is serious and violent. We also do have federal court orders to reduce prison population, but all that does is shift these inmates to the county jail level, which means that we have less people that are actually being held for trial because we also have prison release orders at the county levels. So we talk about probation. So they're trying to put a lot of people on probation, but there's not enough probation officers. This is a alternative to incarceration that is supervised by an officer with conditions to be met. So in the past, probably 7 years, we've had a lot of initiatives on incarceration. So we revised three strikes law to impose a life sentence only when the new third conviction is serious or violent. We have some drug-related crimes that have become a misdemeanor. It's kind of fun when I worked at the police department when this happened because we're going through the system. We're like, oh, that's a misdemeanor now. That should be a felony. It was really confusing for us. They did increase the award of sentencing credits for good behavior and rehabilitative or educational achievements. And we have decriminalized marijuana cultivation, the use, and distribution. Okay, so parole. Parole is typically what happens after you serve your prison sentence and you get out to help you adjust back to society. We talk about this referendum driven by bail bonds industry in 2020. So they wanted to repeal, basically the bail bonds agents companies wanted to repeal a law that was seeking to replace cash bail with a risk-based release and detention system, and this system was full of crap. It came up with a 3-tier system where things like murder, yeah, they'd keep you in jail. Things like grand theft auto or assault with a deadly weapon, they might keep you for a couple hours. And then things like just general, grand larceny, grand theft, we're just going to not take you to jail. It made no sense. And then in 2011, we had public safety realignment. And that was where we shifted a lot of our low-level offenders to the county jails and probation departments. A lot of people got out, and we have seen a lot of crime increase since then. COVID has really contributed to fewer arrests. When I worked for the bail bonds company during COVID, they would not accept our felons with warrants out for their arrest because they wanted to keep the jail populations down so that the virus did not spread. Your book argues that prison downsizing has not affected violent crime rates. I disagree based on the work that I've done. We have seen a rise in thefts, gun-related murders, and hate crimes. Property, organized retail, and car thefts have risen. Hate crimes are mounting. So some of these reforms, they're not working. We have education programs that are funding training to reduce high recidivism. Just so you know, when people are in prison, they can get a bachelor's degree permanently funded through the California State University system. They can get that for free. They also have restaurant management training programs at Solano State Prison. So you guys have to pay, but the inmates get it for free. Then we have this law called AB 2147, and it enables nonviolent inmates who participated in conservation campfire crews to have their records expunged so they can be hired as firefighters. This is one that I do agree with. Many a times we have inmate firefighter crews that actually go out and work hand in hand with firefighters. For the longest time, they could not be firefighters because of their criminal history, but now they can. So we do have programs for officers. We're seeing that law enforcement, it does take a toll on the individual. So we're using budget surpluses to fund programs for officers' emotional mental health and well-being, and community policing. We're also trying to increase the health care for prison populations because longer sentence, more lifers in prison give us more people with health issues. Corrections budgets have declined, but the system still remains unfunded because there's always what do we fund and what don't we fund in the prisons? How do we make it better, but how do we also make sure these people pay for what they did? Lack of lobbying and public sympathy is problematic. The public is split on this. A lot of our prisons are old. Half of all state prisons were built before 1980 and need repairs. So, lowering the amount of people in prison has eased the decision to close several prisons because they can just shift the inmates. It takes about $106,000 per inmate to keep them incarcerated in California. So your book gives a breakdown of where it goes. And then the state supervises adult parolees, but juveniles are um, supervised by county probation. We had AB 392, which dealt with unequal treatment of individuals and lack of trust in the system. This prohibited California police officers from using deadly force when they consider it reasonable, as opposed to using it only when necessary. Having known many police officers, this is a bunch of crap, and not afraid to say that. An officer is only going to use it when it's necessary. So they do have these laws, they've been to address inequities and bias. I think this is kind of a scary law for our officers. It's a law that requires all officer-involved shootings resulting in death to be investigated by the State Department of Justice, people who don't have that background on how to properly look at these things. Two important things. We have the Victims' Bill of Rights, Marsy's Law. I will show you guys a video this week about Marsy's Law. It gives the victims certain rights in court. A criminal defendant has 25 different rights in court. A victim has about 10. And that is because it's been long fought for. It allows support services, being notified of the defendant's whereabouts, and among other rights. This happened after Marcella Leach, who, the bill is named after her daughter, had a heart attack when her daughter was murdered by her boyfriend, and she thought that the killer was in jail, and she saw him at the grocery store. We do have trauma centers for victims to try and help, because somebody who's victimized by a criminal in our state should not have to pay for the costs related to the victimization. That is the end of our presentation. Thank you.